Emergency show. Sean Payton has made his first big move of the offseason, firing offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi just minutes ago. And we are here to break it down, what it means for the Broncos, what it means for Joe Lombardi, what it means for this offense, and what it means for Davis Webb. We're going to get into all of that on an emergency show presented by New Built, which of course is New Built Construction. When that home emergency hits, New Built Restoration and Construction will be there at nubilt.com or 720-903-4254. Let them know the DNVR sent you. Henry, the Broncos, just hours after Sean Payton talked to the media, have made their first move of the offseason, firing Joe Lombardi.
Yeah, I mean, didn't see that one come. In fact, it didn't even cross my mind. You know, you go through and you talk about Vance Joseph, you talk about Jim Leonard, you talk about Davis Webb, and say like, okay, those guys could be gone. And you know that in any given year, Sean's going to turn over a couple of coaches. Like there's going to be a couple of guys you send out and replace. But not once do I think Joe Lombardi would be one of those guys, because he's been the offensive coordinator since Sean Payton got here. So pretty crazy move, surprising move. I'm curious to see what it leads to.
Well, and Henry, a very long-time assistant of Sean Payton, not just since he got here with the Broncos in 2023. He's been the offensive coordinator all 3 years with Sean in Denver, but he started with Sean Payton with the Saints in 2007. Remember that Sean Payton was hired in 2006 to be with the Saints. He hired Joe Lombardi to be an offensive assistant in 2007, was with him till 2013. Then Lombardi left to be with the Lions for a couple of years, then went right back to being with Sean Payton from 2016 to 2020. So that connection runs unbelievably deep with Sean and Joe Lombardi. This couldn't have been an easy move for Sean to make. But Henry, we got a sense earlier today that Sean Payton was not too thrilled with a couple parts of the Broncos offense. Now, it didn't necessarily mean that it was going to come down to firing their offensive coordinator, but there were two things. We talked to Sean Payton this morning at his end of season press conference, and he voiced displeasure with a couple of things with the offense. And there were two notable things that stuck out to me, which kind of was pointing at the coaching. Now, not necessarily Joe Lombardi, but let me get into a couple of these quotes right here that I find fascinating. So Sean was asked about the passing game, specifically catching the ball. Sean said, quote, there were too many drops down the stretch. The thing with the draft, man, we've invested, and I like the players in that room. We've got different players. We have speed, we have size, we have all different things, and you want to have in a good offense. But I think there's a proper way to catch a football, and most of the time it's with your thumbs together, not the other way around. The other way, I'm serious, only exists when the ball is below your belly button. Even the deep balls should be caught with your thumbs together. So we have to be better at that. Okay. To me, that is pointing at coaching, Henry. I don't think all of these receivers were catching the ball a way Sean Payton didn't want if the coaching was how he wanted it to be. So that was one. And then a second one, he pointed to the run game and said, we have to get better in that. That's going to be a key area for us in terms of running the ball on the offensive side. And an interesting thing, he started off his quote by saying yesterday he walked into Zach Strief's office to talk about it, not Joe Lombardi's office. Now, Zach Strief is the run game coordinator, was the offensive line coach, promoted last year to run game coordinator and assistant head coach, but he walked into Zach Strief's office to talk about it, not Joe Lombardi. So maybe Sean had already made this decision, made up in his mind yesterday on what he was going to do. And then essentially he went on to say that I like where the RPO game is at, but we've got to be able to run it under center and control a game. We've been able to do it a few times, but not as much as I'd like. So Henry, we heard from Sean just hours ago that he was not pleased with the way receivers were catching the ball and technique-wise, and he was not pleased with the run game. That's a big chunk of your offense right there. So that might add some background as to why Sean made this move today.
Yeah. I'm curious to see how it all plays out. There's obviously a lot going on with Davis Webb. I think that's the first place everybody's mind goes, is that your quarterback's coach is being interviewed by a bunch of teams to be their head coach, and specifically the Raiders. Now, the Raiders aren't a place where a coach should want to go. We've talked about over and over again. They just don't have the money to be a competitive NFL team at this point, which is probably one of the reasons why Sean Payton turned them down back in the day. And it would make sense for Davis Webb to say, thanks for the offer, but I don't want to. This is just a bad, you're setting me up for failure here. I'd rather wait for a real job. And if that's the case, your quarterback's coach is going to have opportunities to be a coordinator somewhere. So this could be as simple as just clearing the space and say, hey, if I get to keep either Lombardi or Webb, Webb's the guy who's more valuable. And a lot of people say, like, what does this even matter? He doesn't call plays anyway. Calling plays is a very small piece of the offense. Like that's like the tip of the iceberg. You don't see everything underneath, where, you know, the offensive coordinator's in there running meetings that Sean Payton isn't even a part of sometimes because he has other things on his mind. He's a very important voice every single week, building the game plan, probably second only to Sean. And again, Sean has so many responsibilities that there are a lot of those that fall on. So this is a big job, and it's a person who does have a lot of impact on the offense, even if it's not the person who's actually going to be deciding what the play is. Because again, that's the public facing piece of it, but designing the plays and all those sorts of stuff, there's so much else that goes underneath the surface that you don't see. If you come to the point where you say, I either want Davis Webb or Joe Lombardi, if this is the only way to go about it, that could be it. And that's just the first place your mind goes. You know, there's a bunch of different things it could be. John Morton, who was the Broncos pass game coordinator, last year becomes the Lions offensive coordinator, gets fired at the end of the season. Could he be somebody who you would just prefer to have in the meeting rooms? Because remember, the Broncos brought him back to be a consultant for the playoffs. You could say, this is the guy who I want having fingerprints on this offense over Joe Lombardi. So I think that some of it could be, you know, here's this issue or this mistake that I think Joe is making. Some of it could just be, hey, we don't get to keep all of these guys in these meeting rooms, staying up until 2 a.m, figuring out everything that we want to do. And if I've got to pick the voices, this is the voice that I'm choosing to go. Again, I think we'll have a lot better indication of the reasoning that this happened based on where things go from here. Because, you know, if Davis Webb takes the job, then you just say, oh, seems like this might have been a play to really just try to keep Davis in the building for another year.
Well, Henry, let's talk about Davis Webb and what this means for him, how it impacts him, how much he had to do with this. Because from my understanding, after talking to some people after this move was made, this was not 100% in relation with Davis Webb. And it doesn't make sense when you take a step back either, that this would be 100% for Davis Webb. Davis Webb would not take a non-play calling offensive coordinator job over a potential head coach job. If he's offered the Raiders job, and that's what he wants, he's taking that, a head coach job for the Raiders, over being a non-play caller for the Broncos behind Sean Payton as an offensive coordinator. But it is interesting timing, because right now Davis Webb has been spending the past 24 hours with the Raiders. If he decided, like you mentioned, Sean Payton was also offered the Raiders head coaching job back in the day, and he decided to be the Cowboys offensive coordinator for another year until a better job opened up in his mind, which was the New Orleans Saints. He took that. If something similar is happening, where Davis is contacting the Broncos and saying, you know, can I have a promotion? How are you going to keep me? Because remember, the Broncos gave Davis Webb a promotion last year. He was the quarterback's coach in the first 2 years. And then this past year, he was going to be plucked away. And so the Broncos upgraded him to pass game coordinator. That comes with an increased title as a promotion, and also a pay raise. So that could be in play here, but you don't make this move exclusively because it's to fill Davis Webb, or to promote Davis Webb right here. Now, I mentioned Zach Strief earlier. That's another guy who's been on the Broncos staff that's got a lot of interest from outside. He also could have been plucked from the Broncos staff after last year, but the Broncos gave him a promotion, upgraded him to assistant head coach and run game coordinator from just offensive line coach. So that's another guy in-house that could be a candidate to fill this. You mentioned an experienced veteran guy like John Morton that could fill that role. There's some other veteran guys on this staff that have been consultants. Pete Carmichael, a senior assistant, offensive assistant. So there are plenty of options on the roster. I believe that the Broncos will also do a full search for this. I don't expect a move to be made today, tomorrow. They will do a full search here. We'll see. We'll see where that goes. I certainly believe Davis is the front runner if he does not get the Raiders job, and I would expect him to get this job if the Raiders do not hire him. But they did not make this move exclusively to get Davis Webb as their coordinator.
Right, but it is a nice perk that you can now say, hey, Davis, you can stay and be our offensive coordinator. And if Joe Lombardi is your offensive coordinator, that's not something you can say. But yeah, I think most likely it probably is somebody in-house who gets the job. I'd say most likely it's Davis Webb, who's the OC. And then after that, there's, the list of guys we talked about. I will say that the thing that would get me the most fired up is if they go outside and get somebody who has an established background in the run game. Like, that's the one thing that would get me fired up and saying, oh, this is a good move. Because I think I look back at this offense this year and I'm not all that impressed. I look back and say it felt like there was a lot more meat left on that bone. There were a lot of times where that offense is getting booed even, not picking up first downs in the first quarter. The run game isn't working. The pass game isn't efficient. And obviously you're nitpicking because at the end of the day, they found ways to win games. But I don't look back at this year's offense and say, keep this group together, like run it back. I think you need to get better. And I think coaching is a big part of that because there are a lot of times where it felt like there was meat on the bone. Brandon in the chat brought up Greg Roman. That's kind of the first name that comes to mind in terms of just like a pure run game expert who could come in and kind of handle that side of things and make you think that pretty immediately you're going to see improvements. So, well, I do think that you're most likely going to see one of the guys in the building get promoted. I would love to see a new voice because it feels like that offense was just a bit stale this year. It felt like every week there were just complaints that people were having. It felt like there was more meat on the bone.
I will say that Sean Payton has been in the NFL for a long time, has a lot of people he's connected with, and typically he likes to surround himself with his guys. Now, he did hire Zach Strief, but that was a guy that was with him in New Orleans. He did hire Davis Webb, who he did not have a background with, but a lot of other guys on the staff have a connection to Sean. So I would think that they probably stick with someone that Sean is familiar with here. And I did see something in the Toyota chat that I just wanted to point out. This is not Sean giving up play calling duties. Let's make that very, very clear. Whoever is the offensive coordinator is going to be the person behind the scenes. Sean Payton is still going to have play calling duties. There's nothing that indicates he won't do that. Henry, one other thing that potentially could have led into this, and this is just speculation. I haven't heard anything about this. Sean Payton did once again today talked about the decision to go for it on fourth down with 9 minutes and 58 seconds left in the second quarter. A lot of people have criticized that decision because he passed up on a field goal. Broncos lose by 3. Today, he said that he really regretted, he didn't know if he regretted more the play call or the decision to go for it. And then he circled back around and said, what irks me most is the play call. You wonder if maybe he got some information from Lombardi from the booth that was sent down to him that might have indicated to pass the ball instead of run the ball. And he was so frustrated. Sean was so frustrated about that over the past 48 hours that played a role in this. Again, just speculation there, but that was something that Sean Payton also harped on today. Sean's ultimately the one that calls plays, but there's no doubt that Joe Lombardi's in his ear throughout the game, giving him advice on what to do, and potentially sending suggestions for play calls as well. So a combination of things, but clearly this morning, Sean Payton was not happy with the state of the offense right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people in the chat saying things like, oh, he's just a scapegoat, or Joe Lombardi's the fall guy. He had to push the blame. There's no need for blame. nobody needs to be blamed for anything. Well, it does feel like the offense wasn't maximized. I think that's what most teams would probably say is like there was a little bit more we could do. The Broncos won 14 games. The reason they're not in the Super Bowl is because their starting backfield was hurt and missed the AFC Championship game. Like there's no need to blame anybody. And unfortunately, there's a big portion of the fan base that is blaming a lot of people, but that's just the way it goes. Like you lose those two guys and you lose a close game in the AFC Championship game. I don't think that there's any need to like, oh, somebody needs to go. It's more so just a question of can we get better? And obviously Sean thinks that they can get better. And I think anybody would think that they are capable of more on that offense. It kind of stinks that it felt like they were maybe starting to find a bit of a groove. You see that Bills game. I'd be curious to see what happens if you have your starting backfield, because I think you're going to a Super Bowl. It's tough to imagine you fire Joe Lombardi after you go to a Super Bowl. But it's going to be really interesting to see where they go. Like I said, most likely is it's probably in-house, and I'd say Davis Webb is probably the favorite. But again, what would really get me going is if they find somebody out there who has a track record of building really strong run games. Obviously, Greg Roman being the guy on the market who would fit that perfectly. Some people don't like his play calling, which might be why he's out on the market. That's not something you have to worry about. You just need some kind of offensive genius, run game genius in particular, to scheme things up, to be in your ear all week, to help build the game plan, and to help figure out why this run game has been a little bit underwhelming. And the big reason, of course, being J.K. Dobbins not playing all year. But I do think that there are some outside voices who could potentially see some things with this team that the current staff might have missed.
Yeah, and I would say that it probably will be within this current staff. Davis Webb, Zach Street for the guys that I believe we should keep our eyes on. This is not going to be something that's resolved in the next 24 hours. This is going to be a process for the Broncos. And Henry, this is only one of the coaching changes that we will likely be talking about in the next coming days, in the next coming weeks, because Jim Leonhard is expected, according to Adam Schefter, to be at the top of the Buffalo Bills search for their next defensive coordinator. So how will the Broncos fill that hole? Obviously, Vance Joseph potentially getting a head coaching job. From what I believe, I do believe that Vance is going to stay. And then the Broncos could also continue to make moves on the offensive side. Obviously, Sean is not happy if he's willing to move on from his offensive coordinator. Other moves at the position groups could come as well. And we're going to be here to break it all down on the DNVR Broncos podcast. Make sure to hit us with a thumbs up, subscribe. Want to give a shout out to New Built Construction, where if you have an emergency, make sure to go to New Built by going to NIB. Let me pull it up here. NIBLUT.com. When emergency hits, New Built is there. NUBILT.com, 720-903-4254. All right, Henry, before we get out of here, let's get to a couple of super chats. First one coming in from Rend and who says, let's sign Breece Hall. He would be a game changer with this offense and new offensive coordinator. The only other thing we need is draft Kenyon Sadiq and get an elite wide receiver. So you're saying all the Broncos need is an elite running back, borderline elite running back, the best tight end in the draft potentially, and an elite receiver. I like that plan. Sign me up for it.
Yeah, no, you get Breece Hall. Or if you had Breece Hall on Sunday, you'd be going to the Super Bowl right now.
We're gonna have this debate soon, but I like JK. Let's sign JK.
I like him when he plays. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, that's on me.
I wasn't fooled this past year. He was great. I'm looking forward to that conversation. Yeah. We'll hear from JK as well. Got to talk to him yesterday. Mile High Singh says VJ as defensive coordinator, Webb as OC. These are championship moves. Mile High Singh, if I was a betting man on coaching search hires right now, I'd put my money on that combo right there. And man, I think that'd be an extremely strong hire for the Broncos to promote Davis Webb and be able to retain Vance Joseph. And right now, that's what I think is going to happen as well.
Yeah. And then you see who the quarterback's coach is. I'd be curious to see what route they go there. It doesn't really address any of the problems with the offense, which is, again, perfect world, you get to keep Davis Webb as that quarterback's coach, and then you get to use that offensive coordinator job to get somebody in here who provides
You're dreaming too big, Henry. You're dreaming way too big. The Broncos are not keeping, with this move of Joe Lombardi moving on, or being fired. There's no chance, in my opinion, that Davis Webb is back as the Broncos quarterback coach. He's either going to be the offensive coordinator or he's going to be a head coach for the Raiders.
That's certainly most likely.
Yeah,
that is certainly most likely. But yeah, I mean, if there was a way to keep him in that role and find somebody to come in to just provide a new voice, I think that'd be more beneficial than keeping Davis around, if I'm being honest.
Wow. Okay. I love this other perspective, Henry. Because I believe that the ideal thing is move Davis Webb up. You believe go get an outside voice. I want to hear what people in the chat, whether you're tuning in live with us right now or whether you're tuning in later, drop your comments here. Do you want it to be an internal hire? Do you want it to be an external hire? And if you have a name, drop it in there so we can start getting some names going, because like I said, this thing isn't going to be over. Henry, I'll let you get the last word.
No, I'm good. There are some really good coaches out there who might have some really good ideas about how to take this offense to the next level. And maybe Davis Webb has those ideas too. It just feels like he was part of this staff where it feels, again, like there was just a little bit more that you could have gotten out of this group. But people like him. It's tough to say exactly how valuable any of those guys actually are, because we're not in the meeting rooms. We don't know how much of this offense was coming from Davis versus coming from Joe versus coming from Sean versus coming from Zach Streif. So it's really hard to sit here and say this is the voice that they need when we never actually hear those voices in the situations where those voices matter.
And Sean knows exactly where those voices are coming from. And clearly he wanted a different direction, a new perspective. We'll find out who that new perspective is in the coming weeks. We're going to be following it, though, hour by hour, minute by minute. I've already got an article up over at DNVR.com. We're going to be following on social media as well. You can give us a follow, DNVR_Broncos on Twitter, and then DNVR Sports on Instagram. You can follow Henry. You can follow me. That's going to do it for us. We'll be back tomorrow to continue to break this search down. We're going live tomorrow at noon. We'll see you then.
We all silly like the mayor.